Hello, my name is Brian Jones, and I'm AVLS's membership manager. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Marketing Strategies to Implement Now for Your Vein Practice, presented by Healthcare Success, in conjunction with the American Vein and Lymphatic Society.
All right, hi everybody, I'm Stuart Gandalf. I'm really pleased to meet everybody today. I'm sure I have some old friends on the line as well as some new ones for sure. Today's webinar is obviously very timely. Lots of things are happening, and I thought I would start off with this very telling slide. Many of you would recognize the world that we live in. We have here, obviously, this is about legs, but it's also about somebody working from home with their dog in the bed and breakfast to cider. And this is kind of the world we live in, right? And it's been a very interesting transition these last 6 weeks or so. For us, actually, probably about 8 weeks, we went virtual a little early. And we're living in a very uncertain time. I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Thanks for any of you that are out on the front lines helping out with COVID. All of us, for sure, in any event, are dealing with the effects of it. We're all getting used to new normal. Some things are really great. Like, for example, today with my family, I feel like I'm on the lucky side of this. We're really pulling together. Other people are having a hard time adjusting to this. So it's a really crazy new world. One of the things that in the vein marketplace, it's really funny. When I reached out to Brian and Dean after doing a webinar for another company, I've been thinking about my vein colleagues and our vein clients for quite some time, because of course, this could not have been timed worse, right? We're right in the middle of the best time to get inquiries for vein procedures. We're in prime season right now. April, depending on where you are in the country, March, April, May are usually the very best months to get at least the inquiries. You might do the procedures later. So we've missed out on most of the party. Now, of course, we have all year we can market, and that's why we're here. So the states are reopening, and our colleagues on the vein world and are all asking, what should we do now? I should mention a couple things here too as we get started. One thing is to recognize on our comments that we recognize that there are some, single practitioner vein solo practices, right? We have some very large enterprise level vein businesses out there that are, again, focused exclusively on veins. We have, for example, dermatology or vascular surgeons or all the various specialties. So if you know a vein practice, you really know a vein practice. There's a wide variety of marketing savviness, size, skill, practice philosophies out there. So for today's meeting, I'm going to try to cover as much as I can and be as relevant as to many of the possible AVLS members and guests as I can. But really, again, today it's time to, for most of us, begin doing something. What really should we do? Thank you again, Brian, for the great introduction. And outside of what he said, it's just that we've been doing veins for a long time. Our very first ongoing marketing partnership client was a vein surgeon and a long-term friend of ours, Dr. Jonathan Kahlur. And we've been working in veins for a really long time. So today we know that states are in various phases of reopening, and it's funny, I always like to prepare for these meetings beyond just the stuff we usually talk about. I want to make it timely, so I checked this out a couple days ago, and this is essentially the latest about which states are opening. Notice some are still pretty much shut down. I live in California, though we work nationally, and they're just beginning to talk about the possibility of reopening. Other states are full speed ahead, as you know. Some are opening soon. So really broad mix. And within each state, there are different rules and regulations. And that's just the environment we see today. So while all this is going on, I mentioned the unsettling times we're in. Like anything, there's some good news and bad news. But I think this is important to set the context for what it is we're going to talk about today. Another thing is I'm just getting started here. Keep in mind that you're welcome to ask questions. I'm probably going to hold most of them to the end just so I don't lose my rhythm. But we're going to cover a lot of stuff. I typically speak and go pretty fast. My goal is to give you as much information as I can in our time together today. But feel free to ask questions and I'll answer them either today, or if you need to follow up, we can do that as well. So going back to this, the first news that's relevant to our discussion today is that, of course, the Reopen America plan and the headline here with Becker's, ASC News, outpatient elective surgeries to restart under the first phase of Trump's plan. Right there afterwards, the American Hospital Association came out and provided a roadmap. The American College of Surgeons did as well. So there was some various roadmaps from different associations about, okay, exactly how do we begin elective care safely and thoughtfully. Very interesting, I saw a headline in ABC News, how doctors are keeping patients safe as elective surgery resumes. And US hospitals promise new safety measures to ease patient fears. And these are all brand new headlines within the last couple of days. Interestingly, my wife has been putting off a procedure. We were just the day after I went virtual, we called and paused. And so she feels comfortable enough to reschedule. We're going to go forward with that next week. So there are some patients and some people that are feeling pretty good. However, and Trump says it's safe to reopen the states. So, on the good news side, these are some good news article headlines. However, there's other headlines out there that are also happening right now. So this is what's leading to so much uncertainty and so much confusion, and sadly, probably some of our division in our country. So millions of layoffs set to push unemployment to the highest level since the Great Depression. There's about 30 million people unemployed currently, by the way. US officials warn of new virus surge as states reopen. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Models predict sharp rise in deaths as states reopen. This is the New York Times. So you can see that the, whoops, where did I go? The headlines vary a lot. Now, the next thing I want to cover, though, is medical practices, right? Our colleagues today on the line are mostly medical practices. And, this one here from medical economics, medical practice is real financially from COVID-19 losses. So let's talk about that a little bit. COVID has obviously had a massive impact. It's been a national, or it's actually really a worldwide tragedy. From a healthcare standpoint, clearly people are getting very, very sick and people are dying. And as an economic crisis, it's been a disaster as well. So real problem. There's a few silver linings here and there, but mostly it's just bad news. So on a private practice point of view, I pulled together some data. This is from a survey from Harvard. And to quantify what we already knew, but this is the percent change from baseline in number of ambulatory visits. So you can see they declined. This is from ambulatory visits to practices, 60%. Severe drop in visitations to practices. Again, keep in mind that we have different kinds of practices on the lines. There may be some multi-specialty practices which are still in business. There may be some exclusive vein-only practices which may be completely shut down. So these are broader stats, but this is the best data that's available. Similarly, the decline in visits, and not unexpectedly, the surgeons and procedural specialties had a bigger impact. They did not pick out phlebology specifically here, but ophthalmology, otolaryngology, dermatology, surgery, general surgery. You would expect that in a day when a lot of these practices build most of the revenue from elective procedures, when they're being discouraged or outright banned, that revenues and procedures would drop precipitously. The MGMA, those of you familiar with the MGMA, has the best data that I've found. I've followed this stuff, it's my living, and the best data I've found from this particular issue about the impact of the crisis, 97% of practices have experienced a negative financial impact. That is insane. That is such a big number. And it's not a little bit of pain. On average, practices report a 55% decrease in revenue and a 60% decrease in patient volume since the beginning of the crisis. Layoffs and furloughs, the numbers of what's happening today aren't available, but probably more than half the practices have furloughed people, and a very large number have also laid people off. Some of you may be waiting for the PPP. That's extremely frustrating for a lot of you. It is for us. We did the same thing, and we were approved. We were ready for the application the first round. We didn't hear a thing. We were approved in the second round. We still haven't heard anything more. So it's a very crazy time in terms of financial viability. This one is from the California Medical Association, and I'm not going to read all those quotes, but it's really eye-opening. 95% of practices are worried about their financial health. You can see extremely worried, very worried. Only 5% said they were not worried. And we work with doctors all day. Again, this is our job, and we talk to our clients every day. And even reading these comments was just telling to me how difficult this has been. And it's been disproportionate on smaller single specialty practices, which I'm assuming is a fair number of our listeners today, have had a oversized impact. If you're a derm practice and you're doing telemedicine, and because dermatology lends itself well to that, and you have a wide variety of cases, it's still feeling the pain, but probably not as much as a solo practice doing vein exclusive. So it's a big, big impact. So the decision to resume procedures vary by practice. And so, of course, I'm not a medical doctor. It's not my qualifications. I can't advise you whether or not it's time to go back to practice. Some of the criteria that most people are thinking about, obviously there's applicable state orders and restrictions, and where are we with that? There's association guidelines from ABLS, ACS, different associations that you may be looking to. Of course, the local COVID infection rate. How prepared are you? Again, this is obviously you can't just start. You need to make sure you're prepared for the new reality. Economics will also dictate to some degree. Again, we talked about various types of practice models. The doctor and practice owner's comfort level. You know, we work with lots and lots of doctors. They're all ethical guys and gals, and some may feel like, okay, I legally can start, but I still don't feel comfortable ethically that this is a good time. So these are all important decisions. And then, of course, the great unknown is consumer demand. So even if you are ready to go and you feel like it's ethical and legal and we're all ready to rock and roll, but consumer demand isn't there, that's obviously a mitigating factor as well. So these are big decisions. And I'm going to turn the ball over to Brian just for a moment because I have a very important poll. I want to get a sense of where you are in terms of the elective procedures, just so I have a better sense of how to couch my recommendations going forward. Brian? Okay, so can everybody see the screen here, Brian?
Yes.
Yes, okay, very good. So we never stopped, very small percentage. We had paused, but are fully operational. You know what, actually, I want to write this down myself here. So never stopped, 5%. We had paused, but we're now fully operational. We plan to be operational in the next 2 weeks. We expect to be fully operational by June 30, and we think it's going to take even longer. That's really what I expected. That's, of course, all over the board. We have, again, listeners from all over the country and probably internationally as well. I would expect that some of us would be ready to go, and the state permissions have, for example, Texas, things seem to be moving very quickly there. Others may have guidelines. I know, for example, I was just checking one of our clients in North Carolina has to wait till next week. Others either there are states like, for example, California, they're hoping June 30, or they may just not feel comfortable and plan on taking longer. So all of that is very relevant, and that's exactly what I suspected. Okay, very good. I'll take over again. Thank you, audience. That's really helpful to guide my comments. Obviously, as a presenter, I want to know where I stand with my audience. Okay, so we talked about that big factor there a moment ago, which is, the consumers get a vote too. You may be ready, but are they? That's a really, really important question we need to consider. So first of all, Americans are divided on whether the coronavirus situation is getting better or worse, or to some degree, even if it exists. You guys have probably seen some of the scary photos of the Detroit, governor's mansion where people are coming in with, armed. So clearly a very divided country right now in terms of either believing that this is real, or maybe they believe it real, but they feel like we've overreacted, or they're very conservative. This is bringing out, red states, blue states. It's a complicated issue. It's not our purpose today to go into the politics of it all, but just to say that our country clearly is pretty divided in where people stand about the severity of this and how it will impact their behavior. Very importantly, as I mentioned a minute ago with those headlines, there's massive uncertainty out there. So number one was, and these are all respected sources I'm giving you. Earlier was Harvard, this is McKinsey and Company. According to McKinsey, about 64% or 2/3 are very concerned about not knowing how long it will last, but the same numbers essentially are afraid about the economy, the overall public health, and the safety of themselves and their families. So there's a lot of, wherever you are on the political spectrum, and however educated or not you are about COVID, there's clearly a fair amount of concern still. And these are very recent numbers. These are the most recent numbers that are obtainable. In terms of the economic impact of the pandemic, I'm cutting my spending back or plan to spend my money very carefully. I've seen numbers all over the place in the very, and strongly agree, 49%. At least somewhat concerned is generally 60 to 70% kinds of numbers about planning to cut back on spending. Now in the vein world, that's impactful on high deductible insurance plans, right? So because, you know, a lot of times, like I have a high deductible plan, it feels like I don't have insurance. Everything is cash. So that is substantial, and that sadly will impact at least some practices. The Americans, in terms of how long they believe this is going to last, 91% believe that it'll take their, just to get back to their normal routines, will take at least 2 months before they can return to normal. And that, by the way, some of those people say more than a year. As well as 72% feel like the financial impact will last. Now, not everybody's unemployed today, clearly, but there's 30 million who are, and there's a lot of people that are working part-time or less time. So we are not out of the woods yet. It's great that, you know, we're able to open right now, but in terms of being out of the woods, we know that consumers are going to be looking at this from different points of view. Meanwhile, this is another favorite stat that I've been sharing. While a lot of people are delaying major purchase decisions, 95% of consumers are doing a lot more at home, right? You'd expect that if they're being isolated socially. Our company will remain virtual until I completely feel like we're ready to not. We're a knowledge-based company. We don't have to be at our offices. So even when the pandemic, as the pandemic clears, our company is going to be pretty conservative. We don't have to be back in day to day. So you'll see that 2/3 are watching more news coverage. People are spending more time socializing with their family. As I mentioned earlier, this kind of draws some families together. Sometimes it sadly pushes them apart. Watching a whole lot more TV, listening to a whole lot more digital radio. We'll talk about those things in a little while, and it also impacts social media. So our consumption is changing, and of course, video conferencing has become the thing. Interestingly enough, the time that most people said they feel comfortable to returning to sites of care, I mentioned a moment ago that even though I'm pretty conservative about COVID overall, and I feel like in terms of I trust our doctors and our providers here, so my wife is going to go get a procedure next week. Some people feel like, okay, immediately after the pandemic ends, which is difficult to say when that will be, within a month after, more than a month after. So it's pretty broad. You can see here outpatient surgical centers, those of you that have them, very similar kinds of numbers. Looking ahead, how are people revived? Now, this is an important slide for you. The considerations of when to reschedule. So a lot of you probably had postponements for vein procedures when the pandemic hit. And so interestingly, a lot of people said it's based largely on the provider's availability. So that's some heartening news. I'm really happy to hear that. That a lot of people apparently, and again, this is from McKinsey, say that their provider availability is a huge lever for them to go back. So essentially, if you're open, they're obviously, that's a factor. So that means that they're more open to coming to you. Clearly, a lot of people still care about the safety, and that's a theme we'll talk about later. And this is, I want you to, if you're taking notes, this is one you want to star on your notes. 50% said that they would respond positively to the doctor actively contacting them to reschedule. That's really, really important and encouraging. So half the people out there said, yeah, if they call me, I'll probably go ahead and reschedule. If the doctor calls me and tells me it's time to reschedule. So there's some revenue right there that I would take a look at. Any of those postponed procedures for sure, and actively pursue them. Not in a salesperson kind of way, but clearly there's a fair number of people that are likely ready. So this is a famous model. It's by Everett Rogers. It's called the diffusion of innovations. It's one of the things that got me interested in marketing in the first place. I love this model. It's typically applied to technology. what, for example, cell phones or DVRs or streaming TV. And after looking at this is done back in the 60s, typically any new technology, there's innovators, people that just love being on the bleeding edge, doctors like this, right? Different procedures. Some doctors say, I'm going to be an innovator, I'm going to try everything new. Others, probably more like me, I'm an early adopter, but I'll let somebody else, find the mistakes, right? So early adopters are still early on, but they're not at the bleeding edge. Early majority, now as you go up this or down this curve, you'll see that it tends to be really highly educated and more risk tolerant at the earlier stages, and as you'd expect, maybe a little less educated, a little more conservative as you go back. And the people that adapt the technology, there's some people out there now just finally getting a smartphone, right? Those are the laggards. So higher economics, more forward thinking, more education at the front of that curve, typically at the end of the curve, tends to be the opposite. So what I can expect from all the data we just looked at, and this would have been my instinct anyway, but the data proves this out, that some patients are going to be likely to see you right away. Others are going to take more time. So we just have to be patient. I hope to be wrong, by the way. I hope that some of you that are already open can email me later and say, hey, we're slammed, we're so busy right now. But I think the most likely scenario for most businesses is it's going to take a while before things get back to full speed. Many patients are understandably worried about COVID, both in general and when receiving treatment. A lot of patients are wary at some degree of spending money. And again, the good news is active effort on your part can get people to reschedule. So as we go through this, I want you to think about how do we communicate with patients. And so I talked to my creative director. Even if you're not doing any advertising, these concepts really apply. So first of all, I think it's very important to acknowledge whether you're doing emails or TV or internet advertising, whatever, to acknowledge the current situation whenever possible, either directly or subtly. Be transparent about COVID and where you stand. Be aware of little things like, as I was preparing for this meeting, a lot of the slides for beaches, like I wanted to find a perfect beach, shows, this quiet, empty beach, nobody's on, and it just has a potential negative effect on some people. So be really thoughtful of any photos of handshakes or anything that's just out of touch. Another thing is be careful looking too exploitative. Even if that's not your intention, it's easy to come across, oh, they're just money-loving doctors, right? So you have to, this is a very important thread or needle to thread through. Make sure you don't have any unattended messages like we're dying to see you, obviously. And again, I would say this is really, really important. We're doing a new blog post on this in a couple of days. Have empathy. People are grieving today. Very important. So a question you may have is, well, Stuart, all right, we're just getting started and things are kind of slow, or maybe we're closed, right? You guys have said a lot of you are still closed. So what should we do in marketing? Should we just keep holding off and do nothing and wait till things get back to normal? And the answer I have for you is a strong no, not just because I'm a marketer, but because there's something, and I'll explain why in just a moment. However, depending on your situation, it may make sense to pause or stop or stay paused with advertising. And the key factor here is to keep in mind that advertising is 100% not synonymous with marketing. So as I'm talking about marketing, and I'm going to go through strategies top line, I can't teach you everything I know in 45 minutes, right? But I will talk about some of these strategies today. So when I'm working with our clients and our team works with our clients, we usually put together marketing plans for them. And we break it down into 6 categories. And this is at the beginning of any engagement. We always tell you, look, would you trust a doctor that went straight to the procedure without the proper history, exam, diagnosis, and treatment plan? Right? So we don't go straight to surgery. We start off with that. And when we do, and we recommend you go through that same process, at the end of that process, we usually start talking about, okay, these are the 6 categories. These are the 6 levers we can pull for any practice. And I recommend that, you might want to think about this for your own marketing that you're doing with whomever you're using for that. So the first step is internal marketing, and a close cousin of that is patient experience, something I love to talk about and speak to. Doctor referral building is crucial, right? This is especially for a lot of vein practices. Some are really good at this. Other are really, some practices and style are very medically oriented, very symptom oriented. Others are and those are more likely to get doctor referrals. The ones that are more aesthetic oriented, probably not as much, but for a lot of practices, doctor referrals are a huge part of it, right? Digital marketing is my favorite lever that we can do profitably, passively, and predictably. Traditional advertising, branding, and public relations. These are all levers that you can pull. So we may not be doing a lot of advertising today, or we might, but there's other things that you can do. So I would argue that even if you're presently closed, this is still your opportunity to think long-term. Why? By the way, this is an example of a real-life notice of one of our clients. But many of your competitors are absolutely 100% frozen, and they're doing nothing. So from that standpoint alone, if you're thinking in the long term, this might be a good time to at least do something. And I would say for sure your job is, at the very least, is to plan and prepare for the future. So if you're optimistic that things are getting better and better and we're going to stay open, great. If you're pessimistic and thinking, well, I'm really just not quite ready yet, there's still things you can do. So I would argue that even if you're not performing procedures now, and even really if you don't think you will be able to in the near term, what should you be doing? Well, number one, you could create an up-to-date COVID notice for your website because things are changing, right? COVID changes daily. Marketing planning for the reopening. Our team is working with a lot of clients right now thinking about, okay, how are we going to market plan? You always want to stay ahead of that, and it's difficult because the marketplace changes daily, it feels like. Creative work. If you never really, some of you have grown quite large, maybe started very humbly, sort of spaghetti marketing, throwing things up against the wall and seeing if it sticks. If you've ever thought maybe it's time to consolidate, come up with a clearer message, more than just a bunch of tactics, branding, creative, websites, all that kind of stuff, this may be a good time to do it while you have more time and things are slower. If you're in a larger institution, usually in a small organization, it's pretty easy, just talk to them. But if you're coming from a chain of 50 locations, you may want to think about your employee and provider communication strategy. How are you staying on with the people on the ground? Or if you're at a hospital-based business, it's a huge issue as you get into larger organizations. And update your social media and email patients. So on that note, one of the things that everybody should be thinking about is organic social media. So there's a difference between organic and paid. And essentially, organic is anything that you do where you're not giving Facebook or Instagram or anybody else any money, right? And when it first came out, people were actually too excited about organic media. These days, usually your reach, it takes a lot of work just to get to 1,000 followers on Facebook. And then when you do an organic post, you might reach 4% of those. 10% would be a home run. So, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing because your patients will follow you. My wife goes to an integrative medicine doctor among the people she sees, and I'm sorry, more functional medicine, I guess, properly. But that particular doctor is fantastic at, sharing, her thoughts on COVID, guiding her patients. She has almost a cult following, and she speaks at conferences. And so there's no reason you can't do that. You can absolutely spread the word. And so I would argue that to the extent you can, most of us agree social distancing is still important and safety is always important. So you can do your part. In a previous presentation of this, I showed that the Surgeon General of the United States went to Kylie Jenner to try to get the message out about COVID because millennials weren't believing the Surgeon General. So if the Surgeon General goes to Kylie Jenner, I would like to see our local doctors stand up and bring their voice to the fray, right? So social distancing and safety coming from thought leaders like you, very, very important to any extent that you can. Help people who think they may have the virus. There's still concern and confusion about this, obviously, in our country. Provide wellness tips. How can you boost your immune system? And as the curve changes, and if you are seeing patients, assure the public that you are taking the proper safety precautions. Answer frequently asked questions. So I would argue just as a community thought leader, even if you're not seeing patients, this is your chance to really help guide the safety of your community. And I love that. That particular post I'm showing here, if you need any social media assets, we created a few of our own. You can just send me an email at the end of this and I'll send you some of ours. We actually have a long blog post about how to do this. I can send you a quick link of how you can get the word out and help the community in more detail. Also remember your blogs and patient emails. Those three things should be all working together. Blog post for SEO, write a good blog post, share it by social media, email your patient banks. It should be clockwork. You should be doing this for everybody. So on that note, 2 days ago, or maybe it was yesterday, my friend Mike Schneider with Greystone, which is a big player and consulting group in the hospital market, did a webinar yesterday. And Mike showed, you can see the numbers here, what hospital marketers with their great big budgets, what did they say was the most effective marketing channels during the pandemic? Oh, what a coincidence, what I just told you. Social media, email, and blog posts. So these are really, really important channels, even at the hospital level. They're kind of the place to start. Okay, so the content I just covered works for everybody, whether you're open now or not. Let's talk about the people who are open or opening. So what would you do? Well, first of all, ensure that you're updated your COVID safety notice on your website. Create a video. If you can, even a simple video. People have gotten used to simple videos today. It could be simply a Zoom video talking about how important it is to you that your patients stay safe. Here are some of the things we've taken into account. You could literally do a Zoom with yourself and your teammates, or get out an iPhone, do something to put a video on that page to help emphasize how you are taking care of them through safety procedures. Maybe tell them how to prepare for the visit, all those kinds of things. Video is fantastic for that. Again, call and text patients who had postponed their procedures and reschedule them. Email is fantastic for getting the word out en masse. Also, I'd recommend in your email a link to that safety page and video. And the old-fashioned asking patients for referrals. So when patients come back in, you treat them, say, hey, I know a lot of people are afraid to get the care they need, but if you know anybody that has this problem and you feel comfortable, I'd love to help them just like we helped you, right? Old-fashioned strategy from 30 years ago still works. For those of you that are have doctor referral potential, number one, I would recommend this is a great time to go back and review and prioritize your past referral sources. I find that most practices are completely out of touch with who's referring to them. They may remember somebody from the old days who used to refer a lot, who suddenly, wow, they haven't referred in 2 years. Even if they still like you, the staff may not. So others may be snuck on the list and you didn't even know about. So I urge you to take this time to go back and look at referral sources and figure out who's really referring to you today. Reach out and update them. Oh, by the way, have some empathy for them, right? If they probably are struggling just like you are. So this is a great time to rebuild relationships. You have a commonality. Reach out to them as whichever way is appropriate. If you have a physician liaison, have them lead that effort. And if it's safe to go face-to-face in the offices, you want to do that. Consider digital B2B strategies. Now, we write on the topic of physician liaisons a lot. We also just did a webinar on how to, a lot of people are having a hard time because drug reps and physician liaisons aren't getting access right now because of the pandemic. So I don't have time for that today, but if you're interested in how to reach doctors digitally while we're waiting for access to improve, just send me an email when we're done, and I've got more free stuff I can get you. No sales pitch here, but it's just a lot of stuff that's relevant right now. But the short answer is paid social media and email and a lot of other things can help you with that, going out after doctors and nurses and people that you can identify clearly. The digital marketing. So this, again, I find that some of our clients are super sophisticated. They come to us, they understand the secret language of the digital marketing, and they love us because we're talking the same language. Others are thought about this and trying this, so it's all over the board. And having worked with lots of vein practices over the years, I'm assuming sophistication levels on this webinar vary a lot in terms of marketing. They're all doctors, some are just more savvy at marketing than others. So at any rate, updating your website or creating a new one, again, as I mentioned this earlier, this is evergreen. If things are slower, find a way to do it. Search engine optimization is a long-term game anyway. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So if if you have budget that you'd set aside for advertising and you're taking the money out of advertising to pause, SEO would be something really good to invest in because it's more long-term anyway. Look at your online reputation, make sure you have the right system. There's a bunch out there. Organic social media posts, I mentioned before, I'm beating that drum. These are all things that really everybody should do. Now, what about advertising? I mentioned advertising. So those are a bunch of things that you can do kind of wherever you are in the continuum. What about advertising? Does it even make sense? Well, does traditional advertising or digital advertising make sense? It could. If you're open and want to attract patients now, then yes. Digital, and especially digital advertising, is the fastest way I know of to attract new patients. So that's one option. If you're open and you want patients now and things are slow, that would be a place to consider. Two, even if you're closed, do you want to build market share while other people are fleeing the market? We see this. We see this all the time. Some practices are just shuttered. Others are aggressive and position themselves as thought leaders in their community, where they feel like they want to help educate the public. Again, perhaps you're looking to build your brand for long-term and capitalize on your competitor's absence. And this assumes you have a budget, right? If you don't have any money, then probably you can't do it. But these are the kinds of things I want you to think about, and then you can make your own decision. Probably not a good time to start advertising if you're currently closed and you can only invest in direct response advertising where every dollar has to bring back an immediate trackable new patient. Well, obviously, if you're currently closed, that's not going to happen. If you're struggling financially and you have access to a tiny budget, you might have to start with some of the beginner stuff I talked about earlier. And again, I recognize that people here are wildly different levels of experience. Probably some are very sophisticated, others maybe not as much, so just humor me if you're more educated. When I'm talking about advertising, usually the first place to start is paid search. And this is an example of paid search. I did these yesterday. This is literally these screenshots from my home area yesterday. You can see here 2 competitors are already back in. This is the pay-per-click section of the paid search section. Next, we see this is organic. We call this the map pack. This is a whole different strategy. This is free to you. You're not paying any money to Google, but there's a litany of strategies to show up well here. And then finally, these are what we call the natural search results. Very competitive. There's 3 different categories. And the question is, which one do you want? And my answer is, I'm a pig. I want all 3. It's the only time I ever call myself a pig, but in this case, I'm a pig. I really want you to be in all 3 if you can. So all of these things matter. What's interesting here on the digital side or on the mobile side, you can just see how important those paid ads are there. On the first screen on mobile, because of the real estate, the ad is the only thing that shows up on the first 2 pages. So the paid strategy, we typically with our team, when we're working with clients, usually recommend higher emphasis on mobile because about 2/3 of the searches for veins are mobile. Cancer is different. Cancer is less than half, but for veins, it's about 60 to 70%. So it's important from that standpoint, and again, from a real estate standpoint. So if you're doing any of this stuff, mobile is really critical to have your campaign built around that, as well as giving them a destination they're going to that's designed for mobile. So if you're running into this kind of stuff now or not, I can tell you we are, and we closely monitor our clients' accounts. So I'm going to give you some secret insights from the stuff that we're doing. Number one, a lot of the elective-based inquiries are, they're still getting lots of clicks, but we're not getting as many inquiries because people are afraid to come in. Some specialties are seeing tons of click-through rate, others not as much. Things like preventive care and boosting immune system are really important. We're seeing lots more of that. And we predict some decreases in cost per click, especially as competitors leave the market. So I'd say that you want to make sure that your ads read appropriately for your newer reality, monitor, and be prepared to pivot. Keep in mind that Google prohibits capitalizing on COVID-19 or direct references. Consider opportunities like telemedicine can be an offer for you. And display advertising, native, digital, programmatic, if you're more sophisticated, those are things you can do. And oh, by the way, Google and Facebook both promise to provide some relief. When we're talking about Facebook ads, we're just talking about these kinds of things. I'm sorry, that was Google earlier, this is Facebook. So talking about Facebook for a moment, Facebook and Instagram are the ones, they're the major dogs in this fight. Some tips that our favorite places for most practices to start with, not everybody, everyone's different, but paid search and paid social are the levers that we recommend for most businesses. If you are doing this kind of thing, Facebook and Instagram by far outweigh everybody else for the purposes of a practice. Everybody else is way everybody else. These are the 2 big ones. By the way, Facebook owns Instagram. Make sure that your ads are relevant and appropriately emotional. Facebook Live can be great, doing virtual visits, or not patient care, but just doing Facebook Live. They really want more Facebook Live, so they tend to favor that. You've had some other webinars about telehealth. I love telehealth from a marketing point of view, offering that as an easy way to get a screening. So it could be a terrific offer, as well as a revenue builder. And later on, you can start talking about, if appropriate, if you have everyday heroes in your practice. One thing that's brand new, this is my social media manager asked me to share this with you. They have something right now on Facebook with Instant Messenger that's like a chat bot. So when your ad runs, you can set it up so that you ask various questions and it has a decision tree on how to respond. Just a secret, we're getting tons of great response with this. It's really fun. It's just like a chat box. We ask the patients questions and they respond and we can respond back. Again, you can see, and it even builds social endorsements. Finally, we're about to wrap up here in a moment and take questions, but just so you know, I mentioned earlier, streaming TV, like running ads on Hulu, for example, is what I have at home. You don't have to run ads like normal cable or network. You can run ads on places like Hulu. Another topic for a webinar another day. Super, super hot, super growing, big area of opportunity, as well as digital radio. People aren't driving, so they're listening now to iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, all those services at home. So these are for the more aggressive of you. These are some opportunities you may want to look at. So we saw, again, those could be streaming radio and television, broadcast television are great opportunities right now. Billboards and print, not so much. Viewership and listenership, as I alluded to earlier, are outstandingly high. People have a lot more time. And there's also more market space because the Olympics were canceled, there's fewer political ads. Make sure that if you do this, again, create ads that convey the right messaging. We talked about that a little earlier. Here's an important thing. Make sure your agency or media buyer leverages if you already are in the market and you have experience, like our media buyer, Charlie, is amazing. And so he has experience with, hundreds of different reps in different markets. So if you've been in the market, you can go back and you have someone like that has, that kind of skill. Don't be afraid to ask for more. They're willing to help right now. They have, think about this, very low demand and high supply. So rates are plummeting. For example, our media buyer in Chicago was able to negotiate 83 community-oriented radio spots. In Texas, the same media buyer was able to go for a multi-location business we work with. He provided us 180 free spots with no contract, just based on the goodwill. Okay, we understand you have to stop, but we appreciate you. We've got dead air. We're going to give you 180 spots as a way of showing that we want you and value as an advertiser. That's powerful. That's powerful. So for those of you with bigger budgets, that's something to consider. So I have some final thoughts with you. Wow, we're right on time. I love this. So number one, there is some pent-up demand, right? There are people that want to get this done. They're forward-thinking. They are not as afraid. Again, you can be the most forward-thinking, smart person, but if you're in the middle of a pandemic, you're not going to be ready, right? So I'm not saying only forward-thinking people will take action. It really depends a lot on your area and a lot of host of factors. But in general, some personas are going to be ready to take action, others are not. Again, just be aware that some campaigns get a lot of interest, but inquiries are slower than on historical norms, and that's going to take a while. There's just no way around that. Again, make sure you or whoever's working for you monitors the results continuously and be prepared to pivot. Remember that the recovery is going to take time. I know it's tough. I know it's brutal. A lot of you are struggling. Everybody's struggling. This is a really, really tough time right now. So try to be patient. And finally, things will never be the same again. That's my crystal ball. But there's opportunity here, right? Telehealth. You've seen lots and lots of information about that. I was an early telehealth devotee. I love using it for my family. We write about this all the time. But a lot of people have tasted it now. And while some won't go back, a whole bunch of people will not be able to imagine not going back or not being able to use telemedicine. So here's my contact info. I can take some questions, and if you have any questions that you want to talk about offline, or you want to subscribe to our blog, or you want some of the resources I referred to, zero pressure, just let me know. One of the questions we get a lot is, okay, so where do I start, right? And hopefully I covered that at a lot of detail. One of the things I would recommend again is just to look back at creating a little micro plan. You don't need a consultant, you don't need an expensive agency to do that. If you just go back to those simple things, and maybe this would be a great way to look at this. I'll tell you how a marketing plan is typically built. So when we do it, we start off with objectives that are quantifiable, right? So this is something you can do on your own spare time while you're going through this process. Start off with your objectives, both subjective and quantifiable. I want to dominate my market. Okay, how do I know it when I've done that? Or I want to do X number of procedures a year, or I want to have this many new patients. The next section is typically your target audience. Think a lot about your various target audiences. Try to make them real. We often talk about building personas that are different archetypes of different kinds of patients. Build in a section about your competition. There should be a section in there about your brand, what you stand for, what your positioning in the marketplace is. And then your budget, and then finally break it down into those 6 categories we discussed earlier. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful for you. Now I'll answer some of the questions we've got here, now that a bunch have come in. Regarding TV, do you recommend cable or local network? Seems like everybody's watching cable news. It's a great question. A media buyer is not here today, but I can tell you generally we actually prefer broadcast. Cable does have a place. What we find is in normal times, here's what the deal is. Normal times, certain shows do better, and generally those are morning shows that, like, for example, morning television shows, because people don't DVR those as much. So network on a cost per exposure basis is our favorite tool if it's possible and appropriate. So for example, we've done network TV tons in like Baltimore's market, for example. Now, if you're a single practice located in the New York DMA, then that's probably not going to be just cost effective, and you have to go to cable. So it really depends on the situation. You certainly can test it. One of the key premises we always talk about is test it. If you have some budget, you could test that cable news idea. But what we find, though, generally with cable, and I'm not saying we don't do cable, we do, and we had good success with it. We're just saying broadly we do better with network. The problem with cable is, in normal times, people are watching the cable stuff at night. After dinner, they've had a glass of wine. They just don't tend to be taking as much action. Whereas getting people to call and do something right now is usually better in the day, which is usually broadcast. But it just depends. And the other option, like I said, is if you're in a marketplace, a big market, where a metro area we can't afford to do TV, or you don't have enough locations. Like, is Chicago expensive? Well, not if you have 10 locations around the town, Chicagoland. So it really does depend. But again, our idea is typically to test, track, and adjust. Another question is, which is a better option to spend marketing budget on, Google or Facebook? Again, this varies. It really does. We've seen exceptions to every rule most of the time. Not every time, most of the time. The paid search does better. It also depends a lot. One of the key factors there is, do people know to search for what you're offering? And in this case, in this market, with people being sort of shell-shocked, one of the things about Facebook and Instagram, if you think about it, it's a push. I mean, you're pushing a message at them versus waiting for them to search. So right now, I'd recommend a pretty balanced approach. Usually search first, but I'd go pretty balanced right now. Another question is, what you would recommend from transitioning from a mostly primary care practice to a venous lymphatic medicine practice? That's a big topic. I would say that's a really big topic. If you want, you can email me offline on that one, but it comes down to a lot of things. First of all, risk. What I might do, the short answer is, if it were me and I had that situation, I would create what we call a strategic business unit. Create a landing page for the vein business and treat it like a vein business. And then start generating traffic to that page. And then you have to recognize that you have to think operationally how to, it's now a retail business. You're not accustomed to that. That's a big, big deal. Be careful of that. So you need to think about operationally how to handle that. But yeah, if I was conservatively not knowing any more about you, I'd start small, digital advertising, to some marketing very specific about that. You think about your operations, what people see when they come in, all those types of things. This, I promise, isn't a plug in my book. I wouldn't have brought it up, but there's a lot of detail about that. I wrote a book called About Cash Pay in conjunction with my friend Mark Tager, who's an authority on that. And if you're interested in that, send me a name and I'll send you a link to that, because that's a big, big topic. I promise I'm not selling it. It's a good asset. Let's see what else. A little bit more about SEO. I've recently been contacted by several SEO marketers that want to provide SEO services. The problem with SEO is some people are really good and really strong and really ethical, and others are selling smoke and mirrors. The biggest thing to do is to think through is, number one, you don't want to do anything black hat. If they have some secret sauce that gets you mysteriously to the top of Google, run. Two, it's really built upon great content, having ongoing valuable content, distributing that. Number three, recognize that it's a marathon, not a sprint. Number four, there's a lot of advanced techniques. And I don't know where you are on the continuum. If you're interested in enterprise SEO, we've written on some of that stuff. There's something called Schema you can look at. And Schema is a framework that Google and Bing want practices to have. Most practices are terrible at that. So SEO is a huge deal. It's a huge area of expertise. Yeah, tread carefully there. The future changes for the referral business. Great question. These are awesome questions. We went from none, Brian and Dean, to a lot of really good questions. I'm proud of you guys. So the referral business is going to change in a couple ways. First of all, I mentioned physician liaisons. So in the old days, we've been talking about, in the old days, we used to try to convince doctors to go out and build relationships. And if you're willing and able to do that, that's still awesome. That's still great. Almost nobody has the time, and nobody certainly wants to. So then the hospital model brought out physician liaisons, and those are salespeople. And so that can be, if you're serious about this, that can really make a difference. Now, the problem is over time, if you're doing these kinds of things, but that's another whole topic, right? Because who you hire, how do you manage them, how do you compensate them, what are their skill sets? That's a whole other topic. But I would say that even if you have somebody that's great, access is getting harder and harder and harder. Practices are becoming more corporate. They're getting bigger. COVID is changing things. I just saw a webinar yesterday from the pharma industry about digital detailing. So I really believe digital marketing will have a bigger impact. Some of the stuff that we talk about, reaching doctors through email, through their social media, you can do that. Will have a bigger and bigger impact. Doctors are becoming more and more savvy and open to that rather than face-to-face. Webinars have exploded. There are ways of finding things that are interesting and topical for doctors and just adjusting to that reality. And I think COVID is changing that completely. And that's easier for an enterprise level client to do it. For the smaller practices, you may have to transition more slowly. Again, one thing I want to bring up though is absolutely vital. If you walk away with anything else from this particular meeting about the professional referral, is that you want to prioritize your list. I cannot tell you how many times my team audits a practice and they go back and look at the doctor referrals, and the practice looks at their referrals and like, wow, what happened to Ed? I thought Ed loved me, and Ed may still love you, but 5 years ago, somebody on your team annoyed the office manager, and she's showing you who's boss, and you didn't even know it. So it's really important to go back to your referral base, and again, with empathy, reach out to them. This is a perfect time to do that. You've got a great excuse to do that, right? Clinically, you have a reason to call them. So from that standpoint, I would do that. Okay, we have time for another 1 or 2 questions. This timed out perfectly. And those were some great questions. I'm here, I'm happy to answer. Anything else you guys have? Oh, here's one I didn't see before. What are your thoughts on doing COVID testing prior to procedures? I'm not a clinician, so it's hard, I can't relate to that on a clinical level. However, from a patient comfort level, that could be really good. It could be part of the safety procedures to let people know that prior to doing a procedure, we bring in, before we allow a patient to come in, we check their fever, and we ask them to take a COVID test, and we schedule, a couple days later. From a marketing point of view, that could work. In terms of the point of view of Clinically, that's a doctor's decision. Another great question. Wow, these are awesome questions. Really, I'm not blowing smoke. These are great questions. How do you market specifically to Medicare over 65? Fantastic question. So 2 answers there. One is, especially symptomatically, right? Veins, I didn't talk about that today, surprisingly, but, veins are both medical, necessity, obviously. A lot of firms spend way too much time on the aesthetic component. In my experience, results-wise, we try to do both, cover the symptomatic side, cover the medical necessity, but remember the aesthetic is always lurking, especially on the female audience. On the 65 audience, just some quick tips. One, Medicare is like the magic word. Put that into your advertising. It's like, don't even think about not using Medicare. Number 2, where are the consumers? It's the top 2 places that come to mind. I mentioned broadcast TV. If you can afford it, seniors watch. And by the way, be careful that word senior. I'm not 65 or even close to it. I'm getting emails targeting me with seniors, and I kind of go nuts. But people over 65 do watch TV much more than general. They watch the old-fashioned TV. So certainly I would consider, if I have the budget for it, broadcast TV. And Facebook is surprisingly strong in that marketplace as well. Facebook in particular. Instagram tends to be younger. Facebook tends to be older. Wow, another question. These just keep coming in. What's the opinion on YouTube, like having a weekly program? So that's a cool question. 2 things. One is we often advertise on YouTube. That's meaning either directly having videos, but also just advertising while people are watching related content. So advertising on YouTube can work. If you're an A student and you really like the social media stuff, having a weekly program is not a bad idea. There's some advantages to it. I wouldn't start with that. It's a lot of work, but there are some people who just like it. I mentioned when I wrote my book a couple of months, I guess it was a year and a half ago or so, I talked about a doctor here in LA. She just loves it. She likes being a social media celebrity. She's everywhere. I see her. She's just very active. She does Instagram posts of herself. So if you like it and you're good at it and it's easy for you, great. If it's how to save my practice, it wouldn't be my first choice.
Thank you so much, Stuart, on an excellent webinar, and thank you for getting to so many of the questions that they had.